Well, hello there, and welcome to week 3 of This Present Darkness by Frank E. Peretti. I'm Pastor Trina Turner, and it is my pleasure and esteemed honor to be reading with you on Monday evenings at 5 p.m. I believe you can also access this or invite friends by joining on our Victory and Praise page, where there's also a link. But if you're looking at this, you found me by now. So we're going to begin our week 3. Today we're going to read chapters 9 through 12. And when I flipped ahead, that 13th chapter just might have to get read tonight as well. Oh my word. Hey Retha, I'm glad you joined us. I hope you're comfortable. Hope you're all curled up and ready to start our week 3 session today. Let's see, make a couple of adjustments on my side over here. Oh my goodness. Good evening, Sister Dolores. I miss you. I miss you. I miss you. Love you. And we're going to get started. So this is week 3, and we're reading This Present Darkness by Frank E. Peretti. And it's a book that has been translated, oh my word, I don't know how many different times. It's been around for many, many years. And I suggest you actually purchase the book also, just to have it in your library. And so if you have not been following us, I would suggest that you catch up on the first couple of sessions that we read. We're week 3 tonight. And so we're going to jump right in with our chapter 9 of This Present Darkness. Enjoy. Chapter 9. That evening, Marshall and Kate sat 3 places at the dinner table. It was an act of faith, trusting that Sandy would be there, just as she always had been. They had called everyone they knew, but no one had seen Sandy anywhere. The police hadn't turned up anything. They had called the college to check whether or not Sandy had been to her classes that day, but so far none of her professors or teaching assistants could be reached for a definite answer. Marshall sat at the table staring at Sandy's empty chair. Kate sat across from him, silent, waiting for the rice to steam. Marshall, she said, don't torture yourself. I blew it. I'm a washout. Oh, stop it. And the problem is, now that I know it, I blew it, there isn't much chance of a retake. Kate reached across the table and took his hand. There certainly is. She'll come back. She's old enough to be reasonable and take care of herself. I mean, just look at how much she took with her. She can't be planning on being gone indefinitely. Just then, the doorbell rang. They both jumped a little. Yeah, said Marshall. Go ahead. Be the mailman or Girl Scout selling cookies or Jehovah's Witness. Well, Sandy wouldn't ring the doorbell anyway. Kate got up to answer the door, but Marshall hurried ahead of her. They both reached the door at about the same time as Marshall opened it. Neither of them expected a young man, blond and neat, college material. He carried no leaflets or religious propaganda and seemed shy. Mr. Hogan? He asked. Yeah, said Marshall. Who are you? The young man was quiet but assertive enough to do business. My name is Sean Ormsby. I'm a junior at Whitmore and a friend of your daughter, Sandy. Kate started to say, well, please come in, but Marshall interrupted. What, do you know what she is, where she is? Sean paused and then answered carefully, yes, I do. Well, said Marshall. May I come in? He asked politely. Kate nodded graciously, stepping aside and almost pushing Marshall aside. Yes, please do. They showed him into the living room and let him have a seat. Kate held Marshall's hand just long enough to get him into a chair and silently remind him to control himself. Thank you very much for coming, Kate said. We've been very concerned. Marshall's voice was controlled as he said, what have you got? Sean was visibly uncomfortable. I met her on campus yesterday. She went to school yesterday? Marshall blurted, startled. Let him talk, Marshall, Kate reminded him. Well, said Sean, yes, she did. But I met her in Jones Plaza, an outdoor eating area. She was by herself and so visibly upset that, well, I just felt I had to get involved. Marshall was sitting on pins and needles. What do you mean visibly upset? Is she okay? Oh, yes, she's perfectly all right. That is, she hasn't come to any harm, but I'm here on her behalf. This time, both parents were listening without interrupting. So Sean continued. We talked for quite a while, and she told me her side of the story. She really does want to come home. I should tell you that first. But, Marshall prompted, well, Mr. Hogan, that's the first thing I tried to persuade her to do. But if you can accept this, she feels afraid to come back, and I think a little ashamed. Because of me? Sean was walking on some very thin ice. Are you able to accept that? Marshall was ready to be tough on himself. Yeah, I can accept that. All right. I've been asking for it for years. I had it coming. Sean looked relieved. Well, that's what I'm trying in my own weak, limited way to accomplish. I'm no professional. My major's geology, but I'd just like to see this family together again. Kate said humbly, we would too. Yeah, said Marshall. We really want to work on it. Listen, Sean, you get to know me and you'll realize I came out of a pretty bent mold and I'm really tough to straighten out. No, you didn't, Kate protested. Yeah, I did. But I'm learning all the time. I want to keep on learning. He leaned forward in his chair. Say, I take it Sandy sent you here to see us? Sean looked out the window. She's out in the car right now. Kate was on her feet immediately. Marshall grabbed her hand and settled her back into her seat. Hey, he said, who's being over anxious now? He turned to Sean. How is she? Is she still afraid? Does she think I'm going to jump on her? Sean nodded meekly. Well, said Marshall, feeling emotions he really didn't want anyone to see. Listen, tell her I won't jump on her. I won't yell. I won't accuse. I won't get sly or nasty. He loves her, Kate said for him. He really does. Do you, sir? Sean asked. Marshall nodded. Tell me, said Sean. Say it. Marshall looked right in his eyes. I love her, Sean. She's my kid, my daughter. I love her and I want her back. Sean smiled and rose from his seat. I'll bring her in. That evening, there were 4 place settings at the table. The Friday edition of the Clarion was on the streets, and the usual post-publication lull around the office gave Bernice the chance she needed to do some hoofing. She had been waiting eagerly for a chance to get over to Whitmore College to talk to some people. A few phone calls had landed her in an important lunch appointment. The North Campus cafeteria was a new addition, a modern red brick structure with floor-to-ceiling blue-tinted windows and carefully kept flower garden. One could eat inside at a small 2 or 4 person table or sit on the patio in the sunshine. The format was buffet and the food wasn't bad. Bernice stepped onto the patio carrying a tray with coffee and a light salad. Alongside her was Ruth Williams, a cheerful middle-aged professor in economics carrying a taco salad. They chose a secluded table in the semi-shade. For the first half of their meal, they indulged in small talk and general catching up. But Williams knew Bernice pretty well by now. Bernice, she said at last, I can tell you have something on your mind. Bernice was able to be honest with her friend. Ruth, it's something unprofessional and distasteful. Do you mean to say you've uncovered something new? Oh, no, not about Pat. No, that subject's been dormant for quite some time. You can be sure it will reawaken if anything new comes up, though. Bernice looked at Williams for a long time. You don't think I'll ever find anything, do you? Bernice, you know I support you in your efforts 100%. But with that support, I must add my sincere doubts that your efforts will ever uncover anything. It was just so futile, so tragic. Bernice shrugged. Well, that's why I'm trying to focus my efforts only where they'll do some good, which brings me to the uncomfortable subject for the day. Did you know I was arrested and jailed Sunday night? Williams was, of course, incredulous. Jailed? Whatever for? Soliciting an undercover cop for an act of prostitution. That brought the right response from Williams. Bernice went on to tell her as much of the indignities as she could remember. I can't believe it, Williams kept saying. That is disgusting. I can't believe it. Well, anyway, Bernice said, bringing in the punchline, I feel I have good cause to question Mr. Brummel's motives. Mind you, I only have theory and speculation, but I want to chase these things to their end to see if anything really lies behind them. Well, I can understand that. And what could I possibly know that would help you? Have you ever met Professor Julene Langstrot over in the psychology department? Oh, once or twice. We shared a table at a faculty luncheon. Bernice caught a glint of distaste in William's expression. Hmm, something wrong with her? Well, to each his own, said Williams, stirring her salad absent-mindedly with her fork. But I found her very difficult to relate to. It was next to impossible to start any coherent conversation. How does she carry herself? Is she forceful, retiring, assertive, obnoxious? Aloof, for one thing. And I guess mysterious? Although I use that word for lack of a better one, I get the impression that people are nothing but a bore to her. Her academic interests are very esoteric and metaphysical, and she seems to prefer them to bland reality. What kind of company does she keep? I wouldn't know. I'd almost be surprised to find her consorting with anyone at all. So you've never seen her in the company of Alf Brummel? Oh, then this must be the ultimate goal of your questions. No, never at all. But I guess you don't see her much anyway. She's not very social, so no. But listen, I really try to mind my own business, if you catch my meaning. I would definitely like to help you in any way I can to satisfy yourself concerning Pat's death. But what you're after this time is unprofessional and distasteful. Yes, you were certainly right on that score. But accompanied with my own advice to disengage yourself from this thing, let me, as a friend, refer you to someone who might know more. Have your pencil ready? His name is Albert Darr, and he's in the psychology department. From what I've heard, mostly from him, he rubs shoulders with Langstrot every day, doesn't like her at all, and loves to gossip. I'll even go so far as to call him for you. Albert Darr, a baby-faced young professor with stylish clothes and a certain penchant for ladies, just happened to be in his office grading papers. He had time to talk, especially to the lovely reporter from the Clarion. Well, hello, hello, he said, as Bernice came in the door. Well, hello, hello yourself, she responded. Bernice Kruger, the friend of Ruth Williams. He looked to and fro for an empty chair and finally moved a pile of reference books. Have a seat. Pardon the mess. He sat down on another pile of books and papers that might have had a chair under it. What can I do for you? Well, this isn't really an official visit, Professor Darr. Albert. Thank you, Albert. I'm actually here on a personal matter, but if my theories are right, it could be important in a newsworthy sense. She paused to indicate a new paragraph and a difficult question. Now, Ruth tells me you know Julene Langstrot. Darr suddenly smiled broadly, leaned back in his piled up chair, and rested his hands behind his neck. This was going to be an enjoyable subject for him, it seemed. Ah, he said gleefully, so you dare to infringe on sacred ground? Darr looked around the room in mock suspicion, searching for imaginary eavesdroppers. And then he leaned forward and said in a lowered voice, listen, there are certain things no one is supposed to know, not even myself. Then he brightened up again and said, but our dear professor has had many occasions to hurt and slight me, and therefore I feel indebted to her, not in the least. I'm dying to answer your questions. Evidently, Bernice could just dive right in. This guy didn't seem to need formalities. Okay, to begin with, she said, readying her pen and pad, I'm really trying to find out about Alf Brummel, the chief of police. I've been informed that he and Langstrot see a lot of each other. Can you verify that? Oh, definitely. So they do have something going on? What do you mean, something? You fill in the blank. If you mean a romantic fling, he smiled and shook his head. Oh dear, I don't know if you'll like this answer, but no, I don't think anything like that is going on. But he does see her quite regularly? Oh, yes, but a lot of people do. She gives consultations in her off hours. Tell me now, does Brummel see her on a weekly basis? With ebbing spirit, Bernice answered, yes, every Tuesday on the dot. Well, there you see. He goes to her for regular weekly sessions. That's my mama again in the middle of reading. He goes to her for regular weekly sessions. Yeah, call mom. Thanks. But why won't he tell anybody? He's very secretive about it. He leaned forward and lowered his voice. Everything Langstrot does is a deep, dark secret. The inner circle, Bernice, no one is even supposed to know about these so called consultations. No one but the privileged, the elite, the powerful, and the many special patrons that go to her. That's the way she is. But what's she up to? Mind you now, he said with a mischievous glint in his eye, this is privileged information, and I might also caution you that it is not entirely reliable. I know very little of this from direct observation. Most of it I've just managed to pick up around the department here. Fortunately, Professor Langstrot has made enough enemies that few of the staff feel any commitment or loyalty to her. Excuse me 1 minute. Hey, Rue, can you close the door? Get your tablet. Mom's trying to dial in. Okay. All right, here we go. He repositioned himself into an eye-to-eye posture. Bernice, Professor Langstrot is, how should I say it, not a ground level person. Her areas of study go beyond anything the rest of us had any desire to tamper with. The source, the universal mind, the ascended planes. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, none of us know what she's talking about either. Some of us are very concerned. We don't know if she's very brilliant and making some real breakthroughs or if she's somewhat deranged. Well, what is all this stuff, this source and this mind? All right. As nearly as we can tell, she derives it from the Eastern religions, the old mystic cults and writings, things I know nothing about and don't want to know anything about. As far as I'm concerned, her studies in these areas have caused her to lose all contact with reality. As a matter of fact, I may even be mocked and maligned among my peers for saying this, but I don't see Langstrot's advances in these areas as anything other than foolish neo-pagan witchcraft. I think she's desperately confused. Bernice now recalled to mind Marshall's strange description of Langstrot. I've heard she does strange things to people. Foolishness, sheer foolishness. I think she believes she can read my mind, control me, put spells on me, whatever. I simply dismiss it and try very hard to be elsewhere. But does any of it have any credence? Absolutely not. The only people she can control or affect are the poor dupes in the inner circle who are stupid and gullible enough to. The inner circle? You used that term before. He held his hand to caution her. No facts. No facts. I coined the term myself. All I have is a two here and a two there, which makes for a very persuasive four. I've heard her admit that she counsels these people who come to her, and I've noticed that some of them are quite important. But how could a counselor with such warped ideas possibly straighten out anyone else? Then again, yes, I would expect her to claim a special advantage in such a situation. Who knows? Maybe she holds seances and mind reading sessions. Maybe she cooks slugs' tails and newt's eyes and serves them with breaded spider legs to evoke some answer from the supernatural. But now I'm getting facetious. But you do see this as a possibility? Well, not nearly as bizarre as I've described, but yeah, something along those lines, in keeping with her occult interests. And these people in the inner circle see her regularly, as far as I know. I really have no idea how it's set up or why people even go. What on earth could they be getting out of it? Can you give me some for instances? Well, he thought for a moment. Of course, we've already mentioned and verified your Mr. Brummel. And you might know of Ted Harmel. Bernice just about dropped her pen. Ted? Yes, the former editor of the Clarion. I worked for him before he left and Hogan bought the paper. The way I understand it, Mr. Harmel didn't just leave. No, he fled. But who else? Mrs. Pinkston, a trustee on the Board of Regents. Ah, so it's not just men. Oh, certainly not. Bernice kept writing. Go on, go on. Oh dear, who else? I think Dwight Brandon. Who's Dwight Brandon? Dara looked at her condescendingly. He only owns the property the college is built on. Oh, she wrote the name down with a bold lettered explanation. Oh, and then there's Eugene Baylor. He's general treasurer, a very influential man on the Board of Regents, I understand. It seems he's been needled just a little about whatever it is he and the professor do in their sessions together, but he remains self righteous and steadfast in his convictions. Oh, and there's also that reverend fellow, that uh, Oliver Young. How did you know? Bernice only smiled. A lucky guess. Carry on. Chapter 10. On Friday evening, Hank couldn't get the upcoming business meeting off his mind, which was probably to his advantage, considering the young lady sitting across from him in his little office corner of the house. He had asked Mary to stick around closely and act very loving and wifely. This young lady, Carmen was the only name she gave, was quite a caseload. The way she dressed and carried herself, Hank made sure that it was Mary who answered her knock at the door and let her in. But as far as Hank could tell, Carmen wasn't trying to put on a facade. She seemed real enough, just sincerely overdone. And as for her reasons for wanting counseling, I think, she began, I think I'm just very lonely, and that's why I keep hearing voices. Immediately, she examined their faces for their reaction. But after their recent experiences, nothing sounded too far out to Hank and Mary. Hank asked, what kind of voices? What kind of things do they say? She thought for a moment, searching the ceiling with big, overly innocent blue eyes. What I'm experiencing is legitimate, she said. I'm not crazy. No problem there, Hank said. But tell us about these voices. When do they talk to you? When I'm alone, especially like last night, I was lying in bed and she related the words the voice spoke to her, and it could have been a perfect script for an obscene phone call. Mary didn't know what to say. This was becoming heavy. To Hank, it sounded kind of familiar, and though he felt very cautious about Carmen and her motives, he still remained open to the possibility that she was encountering some of the same demonic forces he'd been dealing with. Carmen, he asked, do these voices ever say who they are? She thought for a moment. I think one of them was Spanish or Italian. He had an accent and his name was Amano or Amanzo or something like that. He always spoke very soothingly to me. That's Mama. He also spoke very soothingly and always said he wanted to make love to me. Just then the phone rang. Mary quickly got up to answer it. Hurry back, Hank said. She hurried away. That was for sure. Hank was watching her go when he felt Carmen touching his hand. You don't think I'm crazy, do you? She asked with pleading eyes. Hank withdrew his hand to scratch a non existent itch. No, Carmen, I'm not. I don't. But I do want to know where these voices came from. When did you first start hearing them? When I came to Ashton. My husband left me and I came here to start over, but I get so lonely. You first started hearing them when you came to Ashton? I think it was because I was lonely. And I still am lonely. What was it they said at first? How did they introduce themselves? I was alone and lonely. I just moved here and I thought I heard Jim's voice. You know, my husband's. Go on. I really thought it was him. I didn't even think about how he could talk to me without being there, but I talked back and he told me how much he missed me and how he thought it would be better this way. And he spent the rest of the night with me. She began to shed some tears. It was beautiful. Hank didn't know what to make of this. Incredible, is all he could say. She looked at him with those big pleading eyes again and said through her tears, I knew you'd believe me. I've heard about you. They say you're a very compassionate man. You're very understanding. Depends on who you listen to, Hank thought. But then her hand was touching his again. Time to recall a recess, Hank thought. He said, trying to be comforting and sincere and non judgmental. Listen, I think this has been a fruitful hour. Oh, yes. Would you like to come again next week sometime? Oh, I'd love to, she exclaimed as if Hank had asked her for a date. I have so much more to tell you. Well, okay. I think next Friday will be fine for me if it's fine for you. Oh, it was. It was. And Hank stood up to give her the hint that the session was over for now. They hadn't covered much ground, but as far as Hank was concerned, boy, it was enough. Now, let's take both some time to think about these things. After a week, maybe they'll be a little clearer to us. They might make more sense. Where was Mary? Ah, she came back into the room. Oh, leaving so soon? It was wonderful, Carmen sighed, but at least she had let go of Hank's hand. Getting Carmen out the door was easier than Hank had expected. Good old Mary, what a lifesaver. Hank closed the door and leaned against it. Whew, is all he could say. Hank, Mary said in a hushed voice, I don't think I like this. She's a real hot one, isn't she? What do you think of what she said? I'll wait and see. Who was that on the phone? Just wait until you hear this. It was some lady from the Clarion wanted to know if it was Alf Brummel we disfellowshipped from the church. Hank suddenly looked like an inflatable toy that had sprang a leak. A little disappointed, Bernice walked into Marshall's office. Marshall was at his desk going over some new advertising copy for Tuesday's edition. So what did they say? He asked her without looking up. Nope, it isn't Brummel. And I guess it wasn't a very tactful question. I talked to the pastor's wife, and by her tone of voice, I can infer that the whole subject is very touchy. Yeah, I've heard talk at the barber shop. Some guy was saying that they're going to vote the pastor out tonight. Ah, so they do have troubles, but totally unrelated to ours, and I'm glad. It's gone far enough. Marshall looked again at the list of names Bernice had gotten from Albert Darr. How am I supposed to get any work done around here with this kind of stuff hanging around unresolved? Bernie, you're getting to be a lot of trouble. You know that? She took it as a compliment. And you have looked over that flyer of elective courses Langstrad is teaching? Marshall picked it up from his desk and could only shake his head incredulously. What in the blazes is all this stuff? Introduction to God and Goddess Consciousness and the Craft, the Divinity of Man, Witch, Warlock, and the Sacred Medicine Wheel. How do spells and rituals work? You gotta be kidding. Read on, boss. Pathways to your inner light. Meet your own spiritual guides. Discover the light within. Harmonize your mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual levels of being through hypnosis and meditation. Marshall read a little further and then exclaimed, What? How to enjoy the present by experiencing past and future lives? I like the one near the bottom there. In the beginning was the goddess. Langstrad, perhaps? Why hasn't anyone heard about all of this before? For some reason, it was never advertised in the school paper or in the public list of classes. Albert Darr gave me the flyer himself and said it was a somewhat exclusive pass-around item among the interested students. And my little Sandy is sitting in this woman's class. And in a way, so are all those people on that list. Marshall set down the flyer and picked up the list. He shook his head again. It was all he could think of to do. Bernice added, I guess I don't mind it too much if a bunch of dupes want to be taken in by Langstrad, but they're all too important. Just look at that. 2 of the college regents, the owner of the college land, the county comptroller, the district judge, and young, respected, reverend, influential, community involved Oliver Young. Marshall let some memory tapes play in his head. Yeah, it fits. It makes sense now. All that vague, non committal stuff he was handing me in his office. Young's got a religion all his own. He's no hard shell Baptist, I'll tell you that. Religion, I don't care about. Lies and cover ups, I do. Well, he most certainly denied knowing Langstrad. I asked him directly, right to his face, and he told me he didn't know her. Somebody's lying, Bernice sing song. But I just wish we had some more corroboration. Corroboration. Yeah, we've only just met Dar. What about Ted Harmon? How well do you know him? Well enough, I suppose. You heard why he left? Marshall sneered just a bit. Brummel said there was some kind of scandal, but who can you believe these days? Ted denied it. Oh, everybody's saying everything and everybody's denying everything. Well, call him. I have the number. He's living up near Windsor now. I think he's trying to be a hermit. Marshall looked at all the advertising copy still on his desk, awaiting his time and attention. How am I going to get any of this stuff done around here? Hey, it's no biggie. If I could do some independent hoofing, the least you can do is give Ted a call. Do it tomorrow, Saturday, your day off. Reporter to reporter, newsman to newsman. You might hit it off with him. Marshall sighed. Let's have the number. Mary finished the dinner dishes, put up the towel, and made her way through the little house to the back bedroom. There in the dark, Hank knelt beside the bed in prayer. She knelt down beside him, took his hand, and together they placed themselves in the hands of the Lord. God's will would be done this night, and they would accept it, whatever it was. Alf Brummel had a key to the church and was already there switching on the lights and turning up the thermostat. He wasn't feeling well at all. They'd just better vote right this time, he kept thinking. Outside, even though it was still a half hour before the meeting, cars began to arrive. More than were usually there on Sundays. Sam Turner, Brummel's chief cohort, drove up in his big Cadillac and helped his wife Helen from the car. He was a rancher of sorts, not a land baron, but he acted like one. Tonight he was grim and determined, as was his wife. In another car came John Coleman and his wife Patricia, a quiet couple who came to Ashton Community after leaving a large church elsewhere in town. They really liked Hank and made no effort to hide it. They knew well that Alf Brummel would not be happy to see them there. Others arrived and quickly coagulated into little clusters of similar sentiment, speaking in very, very quick syllables and hushed tones, and keeping their eyes to themselves, except for a few rubbernecking nose counters trying to foresee the final tally. Several dark shadows kept a wary eye on everything from their perch atop the church roof, their stations around the building, or their appointed posts in the sanctuary. Lucius, more nervous than ever, paced and hovered about. Baal Rafar, still wanting a very low profile, had entrusted this task to him, and for this night at least, Lucius was back in his old glory. What worried Lucius the most were the other spirits standing around, the enemies of the cause, the host of heaven. They were held at bay by Lucius's forces, to be sure, but there were some new ones that he had never seen before. Nearby, but not too near, Signa and his two warriors kept watch. Upon Tao's orders, they allowed demons access to the building, but monitored the demons' activities and kept an eye out for Rafar. So far, their very presence, as well as the presence of so many other warriors, had had a taming effect on the demonic host. There had been no incidents, and for now, that was all Tao wanted. When Lucius saw the Colemans come in the front door, he was agitated. In the past, they had never been very strong against the defeats and discouragements Lucius had ordered, and their marriage had just about dissolved. Then they aligned themselves with Praying Bush, hearing his words and becoming stronger all the time. Before long, they and others like them would be a real threat. But their arrival didn't cause Lucius as much agitation as the huge, blonde-haired messenger of God who had accompanied them. Lucius knew for sure he'd never seen this one before. As the Colemans found a seat, Lucius swooped down and accosted this new intruder. "I've not seen you before," he said gruffly, and all the other spirits focused their attention on him and the stranger. "From where do you come?" The stranger, Shimon of Europe, said nothing. He only riveted his eyes on those of Lucius and stood firm. I'll have your name, Lucius demanded. The stranger said not a word. Lucius smiled slyly and nodded. You are deaf, yes? And dumb? And as mindless as you are silent. The other demons scoffed. They loved this kind of game. Tell me, are you a good fighter? Silence. Lucifer drew a scimitar that flashed blood red and droned metallically. On cue, all the other demons did the same. The clatter and ring of burnished blades filled the rooms as crimson crescents of reflected light danced about the walls. The other messengers of God were barred from intervening by an armed ring of demons as Lucius continued to toy with this one single newcomer. Lucius peered at his solid, unmoving opponent with a burning hatred that made his yellow eyes bulge and his sulphurous breath chug out through his widely flared nostrils. He toyed with his sword, waved it in small circles in the stranger's face, watched for the stranger to make the slightest move. The stranger only watched him, not moving at all. With an intense cry, Lucius swept his sword across the front of the stranger, slashing his garment. Cheers and laughter came from the crowd of demons. Lucius, poised for a fight, held his sword with both hands, crouched, his wings flared. Before him stood a statue with a slashed tunic. Fight, you listless spirit, Lucius challenged. The stranger did not respond, and Lucius cut his face. Another cheer from the demons. Shall I remove an ear or two? Shall I cut out your tongue if you have one? Lucius taunted. I think it's time we got started, said Alf Brummel from the pulpit. The people in the room stopped their hushed conversations, and the place began to quiet down. Lucius leered at the stranger and motioned with his sword. Go stand with the other cowards. The newcomer stepped back, then took his place with the other messengers of God behind the demonic barricade. 11 angels had managed to get into the church without raising too much ire from the demons. Triskel and Cryone had already entered with Hank and Mary. They had often been seen with the pastor and his wife, so they were not paid much attention other than the usual threatening expressions and postures. Gilio was there, as big and threatening as ever, but apparently no demons were the slightest bit interested in asking him any questions. A newcomer, a burly Polynesian, made his way over to Chiman and tended the wound on Chiman's face while Chiman repaired the slash in his tunic. Mata, called here from Polynesia, came the introduction. Chiman of Europe, welcome to our numbers. Can you continue? Mata asked. I will continue, Chiman answered, skillfully weaving his tunic with his fingers. Where's Tal? Not here yet. A demon of fever tried to stop the Colemans. No doubt Tal has encountered an attack on Duster. I don't know how he'll ward it off without making himself visible. He'll do it. Chiman looked about. I don't see the Baal Prince anywhere. We may never, and may he never see Tal. Brummel brought the meeting to order, standing behind the pulpit, looking out over the nearly 50 people who had gathered. From this vantage point, even he couldn't help but to try to guess the final tally. Some of the people were definitely going to give Hank the axe. Some were definitely not going to. And then there was that frustrating and unpredictable group he could never be sure about. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, he said. This is a painful matter for us to decide. I'd always hoped that this night would never come, but we all want God's will to be done, and we want what will be best for his people. So let us open with a word of prayer and commit the rest of the evening to his care and guidance. With that, Brummel began a very pious prayer, appealing to the Lord for grace and mercy in words to bring a tear to the driest eye. In the front corner of the sanctuary, Gillo sulked, wishing an angel could spit on a human. Triskel asked Chiman, getting any strength? Chiman answered, why? Is someone else going to pray? Brummel finished his prayer. The roomful muttered a few amens, and then he went on with his introduction to the proceedings. The purpose of this meeting is to openly discuss our feelings regarding Pastor Hank, to put an end once and for all to the backbiting and murmuring that's been going on, and to end our meeting with a final vote of confidence. I would hope that we would all have the mind of the Lord in these matters. If you have something you wish to say to the group, we would ask that you limit your time to 3 minutes. I'll be letting you know when your time is up, so keep that in mind. Brummel looked at Hank and Mary. I think it would be good to let the pastor have the first say. Afterwards, he'll leave us alone so we can talk freely. Mary squeezed Hank's hand as he got up. He went to the pulpit and stood behind it, gripping its sides. For the longest time, he couldn't say a word, but only looked into every eye of every face. He suddenly realized how much he truly loved these people, all of them. He could see the hardness in some of the faces, but he couldn't help seeing past that to the pain and bondage these people were under, deluded, led astray by sin, by greed, by bitterness and rebellion. In many other faces, he could read the pain they were feeling for him. He could tell that some were silently praying for God's mercy and intervention. Hank let a quick prayer course through his thoughts as he began. I have always counted it a privilege to stand behind this sacred desk, to preach the word, and to speak the truth. He surveyed their faces again for just a moment and then continued. And even tonight, I feel I cannot stray from God's commission to me and the purpose for which I ever stood before you. I'm not here to defend myself or my ministry. Jesus is my advocate, and I rest the course of my life on his grace, guidance, and mercy. So tonight, since I'm standing behind this pulpit once again, let me share with you what I've received from God. Hank opened his Bible and read from 2 Timothy chapter 4. I solemnly charge you in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who is to judge the living and the dead, and by his appearing and his kingdom preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. Reprove, rebuke, exhort with great patience and instruction. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires, and will turn away their ears from the truth and will turn aside to myths. But you be sober in all things, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. Hank closed his Bible and he looked about the room and he spoke firmly. Let each one of us apply God's word where it may apply. Tonight I will speak only for myself. I have my call from God. I just read it. Some of you, I know, have gotten the impression that Hank Bush is obsessed with the gospel, that it's all he ever thinks about. Well, that's true. Sometimes I even wonder why I remain in such a difficult position, such an uphill effort. But for me, God's call on my life is an inescapable commission. And as Paul said, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. I understand that sometimes the truth of God's word can become a divider, an irritation, a stone of stumbling. But that's only the beginning, because it remains unchanged, uncompromising, and steadfast. And what better reason could there be to build our lives on such an immovable foundation? To violate the word of God is only to destroy ourselves, our joy, our peace, our happiness. I want to be fair with you, and so I'll be truthful in letting you know exactly what you may expect from me. I intend to love all of you, no matter what. I intend to shepherd and feed you for as long as you'll have me. I will not discredit, compromise, or turn my back on what I believe the word of God teaches. And that means that there may be times when you'll feel my shepherd's crook around your neck, not to judge or malign you, but to help you move in the right direction, to protect you, to heal you. I intend to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, for that is my calling. I have a burden for this town. Sometimes I feel the burden so strongly, I have to ask myself why. But it's still there, and I can't turn my back on it or try to deny it. Until the Lord tells me otherwise, I intend to remain in Ashton to answer that burden. Now, if that's the kind of pastor you want, then you can let me know tonight. If you do not want that kind of pastor, well, I really need to know that too. I love all of you. I want to be the very best God has to give you. And I guess that's all I have to say. Hank stepped down from the platform, took Mary's hand, and the two of them walked down the aisle to the door. Hank tried to catch the eyes of as many people as he could. Some gave looks of love and encouragement. Some looked away. Cryonia and Trisco left with Hank and Mary. Lucius watched with mocking disdain. Giulio muttered to his fellows, "While the cat's away, the mice will play." "Where is Tal?" Chimman asked again. Brummel stood before the group. "Well, now, we'll hear statements from the congregation. Just raise your hand to be recognized. Yes, Sam, why don't you go first?" Sam Turner stood and walked to the front of the sanctuary. "Thanks, Alf. Well, I've no doubt you all know me and my wife, Helen. We've been citizens of this community for over 30 years, and we've supported this church through thick and through thin. Now, I don't have a lot to say tonight. You all know what kind of man I am, how I believe in loving one's neighbor and living a good life. I've tried to do right and be a good example of what a Christian should be. And I'm angry tonight. I'm angry for my friend Lou Stanley. You may have noticed Lou isn't here tonight, and I'm sure I know why. It used to be he could show his face in this church and be a part of it, and we all loved him and he loved us. And I think we all still do. But this Bush fellow, who thinks he's God's gift to this earth, thought he had a right to judge Lou and kick him out of the church. Now, friends, let me tell you one thing. Nobody kicks Lou Stanley out of anything if Lou doesn't feel like it. And the very fact that Lou went along with this whole smear on his character only shows the goodness of his heart. He could have sued Bush by now, or he could have settled the matter like I've seen him settle other matters. He's not afraid of anything. But I just think Lou's so ashamed of the horrible things that's been said about him and so hurt by what he thinks, we must think of him that he decided he just better stay away. Now, we have this self-righteous, Bible-pounding gossip monger to blame for these troubles. Forgive me if I sound a bit harsh, but listen, I can remember when this church was like a family. How long now since it's been that way? Look what's happened. Here we are having a big bicker meeting. And why? Because we let Hank Bush come into our peaceful town and stir us all up. Ashton used to be a peaceful town. This church used to be a peaceful church. And I say we do what's necessary to get it that way again. Turner took his seat as a few nearby nodded their silent encouragement and approval. John Coleman was recognized next. A shy person, he was very nervous about speaking in front of everyone, but concerned enough to do it anyway. "Well," he said nervously, handling his Bible and looking at the floor, "I don't usually say much, and I'm scared to death to be standing up here, but I think Hank Bush is a real man of God, a good pastor, and I'd really hate to see him go. The church Pat and I came from, well, it just wasn't meeting our needs, and we were getting hungry for the word, for the presence of God. We thought we'd found those things here, and we were really looking forward to being involved and growing in the Lord under Hank's ministry. And I know a lot of other folks feel that way too. As far as this stuff about Lou is concerned, that was not just Hank's doing. All of us were involved in that decision, including me. And I know Hank's not trying to hurt anybody." As John sat down, Patricia patted his arm and said, "You did fine." John was not sure. Brummel addressed the group. "I think it might be a good idea for us to hear what the church secretary, Gordon Mayer, has to say." Gordon Mayer went to the front with some of the church records and minutes in his hands. He was a tense man with a tight expression and a gruff voice. "I have 2 items I'd like to address before this group," he said. "First of all, from the business side, you all need to be aware that the offerings have been decreasing over the past several months, but our bills have been staying steady, if not going up. In other words, we're running out of money, and I personally have no doubts why. There are differences among us we really need to get resolved. And withholding your giving is not the way to do it. If you have a gripe against the pastor, then you do what you have to do tonight. But let's not bring the whole church down over this one man. Secondly, for whatever it's worth, let me tell you that the original pulpit committee was considering another man for the job. I was on that committee, and I can assure you that they had no intention of recommending Bush for the office. I'm convinced the whole thing was a fluke, a grave mistake. We voted in the wrong man, and now we're paying for it. So let me close with this. Sure, we made a mistake, but I got faith in the group here, and I think we can turn the whole thing around and start doing things right for a change. And I say, let's do it. And so the evening went for the better part of 2 hours as both sides took turns in crucifying and praising Hank Bush. Nerves got raw, bottoms got numb, backs got sticky, and the opposing views became more and more vehement in their convictions. After 2 hours, a common sentiment began to mutter its way around the room. Come on, let's have the vote. Brummel had taken his jacket off, loosened his tie. He had rolled up his sleeves. He was gathering a pile of small squares of paper, the ballots. Okay, this will be by secret ballot, he said, handing the slips of paper to two quickly appointed ushers who passed them out. Let's just keep it simple. If you want to keep the pastor, say yes. And if you want to find someone else, say no. Martha nudged Chimman. Will Hank have enough votes? Chimman only shook his head. We're not sure. You mean he could lose? Let's hope someone is praying. Where, oh, where is Tal? Writing a simple yes or no didn't take long, so almost immediately the ushers were passing the offering plates among the people. Gillo stood in his corner, glaring at as many demons as would look at him. Some of the smaller, harassing spirits flitted about the sanctuary, trying to see what people were marking on their ballots and grinning, scowling, cheering, or cursing accordingly. Gillo could envision 3 or 4 of their little wiry necks in his fists. Someday soon, little demons, someday soon. Brummel took charge again. All right, in the interest of fairness, let's have representatives from the 2 different viewpoints come up and do the counting. After a bit of nervous chuckling, John Coleman was selected by the yeas and Gordon Mayer by the nays to count the ballot. The 2 men took the offering plates full of ballots to the back pew. A flock of flapping, hissing demons converged on the scene, wanting to see the outcome. Gillo stepped out too. It was only fair, he thought. Lucius swooped down from the ceiling in an instant and hissed, Get back in your corner. I wish to see the outcome. Oh, don't you now? Lucius sneered. And what if I decide to cut you open as I did your friend? Something about the way Gillo answered, Try it, may have caused Lucius to reconsider. Gillo's approach sent the little demons fluttering away like a flock of chickens. He bent over 2 of the men to have a look. Gordon Mayer was counting first, silently, then handing the ballots to John Coleman. But he stealthily hid a few yay ballots in his palm. Gillo checked to see how closely the demons were watching, then made a stealthy move himself, touching the back of Mayer's hand. A demon saw it and struck Gillo's hand with the bared talons. Gillo jerked his hand away and came infinitely close to tearing the demon to shreds, but he caught himself and honored Tal's orders. What is your name? Gillo wanted to know. Cheating, the demon answered. Cheating, Gillo rehearsed, and he went back to his corner. Cheating. But Gillo's move had succeeded in foiling Mayer's efforts. The ballots dropped out of Mayer's hand, and John Coleman saw them. You dropped something there, he said very sweetly. Mayer couldn't say anything. He just handed the ballots over. The count was finished, but Mayer wanted to count them again. They counted the ballots again. The count came out the same, a tie. The 2 reported the results to Brummel, who told the congregation, which moaned quietly. All Alf Brummel could feel was his hands getting very damp. He tried drying them on his handkerchief. Well, listen, he said, there may not be much chance that any of you will reconsider, but I'm sure none of us wants to prolong this thing past tonight. I tell you what, why don't we take a short break and give some of you a chance to get up, stretch, use the restroom, and then we'll regather and vote again. As Brummel spoke, the 2 demons posted around the church saw something very unsettling. Just about a block up the street were 2 old women hobbling towards the church. One walked with the assistance of a cane and a helping hand from her friend. She did not look well at all, but her jaw was set and her eyes bright and determined. Her cane clacked out a syncopated rhythm with her footsteps. Her friend, in better health and stronger, kept up with her, holding her arm to support her and talking gently to her. The one with the cane is Duster, said one demon. What went wrong? The other wondered. I thought she'd been taken care of. Oh, she's ill, all right, but she's come anyway. And who is the old woman with her? Edith Duster has many friends. We should have known. The two ladies made their way up the church steps, each step a major task in itself. First one foot, then the other, then the cane placed on the next step, until they were finally up to the front door. There, look at that now, cackled the stronger one. I knew you could do it. The Lord's gotten you this far. He'll take you the rest of the way. What Edith Duster needs is a stroke, murmured the sickness demon, drawing out his sword. Perhaps it was simply luck or an incredible coincidence, but just as the demon lunged forward with great speed to slash at the arteries in Edith Duster's brain, the other woman moved to open the door and stepped right in the way. The tip of the demon's sword struck the woman in the shoulder, which could have been concrete. The sword stopped short. Sickness did not, but catapulted over the two women and fluttered like a fractured kite into the churchyard as Edith Duster moved inside. Sickness gathered himself up off the ground and screamed, The host of heaven! The other demon guard stared at him blankly. Brummel saw Edith Duster come in alone. He cursed silently. This would be the vote to break the tie, but she would most certainly vote for Bush. The people were gathering again. The messengers of God were elated. Looks like Tal succeeded, said Mara. Chimman was concerned, however. With such a heavy cover of the enemy, he most certainly had to show himself. Gilio chuckled. Oh, I'm sure our captain was very discreet. A few of the demons were, in fact, wondering what had happened to Edith Duster's companion between the front door and the sanctuary. Sickness continued, insisting it had been a heavenly warrior. But where was she now? Tal, captain of the host, joined Signa and the other sentries at their concealed position. You had me fooled, Captain, said Signa. You just might attempt it yourself sometime, Tal replied. On the platform, Brummel mentally groped for a trump card. He could just see the burning eyes of Langstrot if this vote went the wrong way. Well, he said, why don't we come to order now and get ready for another vote? The people settled in and quieted down. The yay side was more than ready. Now that we've prayed and talked about it, maybe some of us will feel differently about the future of the church here. Come on now, say something, but don't make a fool of yourself. I guess I could say a few words. I haven't really shared my feelings, you know. Hank Bush is a little young, a middle-aged plumber on the yay side piped up. Hey now, if you're going to put in some negative input, we've got to have equal time for some positive. The yays all murmured in agreement while the nays sat in cold silence. No, listen, Brummel stammered, his face bright red. I had no intention of trying to sway the vote. I was let's just have the vote, someone said. Yes, vote, and quick, Rhoda whispered. Just then the door opened. Oh no, thought Brummel, who's coming in this time? The silence fell like a shroud of death over the whole group. Lou Stanley had just come in. He grimly nodded greeting to them all and took a seat in the back pew. He looked old. Gordon Meyer popped up. Let's have the vote. The ushers passed out the ballots while Brummel tried to plan a good escape route in case he had to throw up. His nerves were just about shot. He caught Lou Stanley's attention. Lou looked at him and seemed to laugh nervously. Make sure Lou back there gets a ballot, Brummel told one of the ushers. The usher made sure. Chimon whispered to Gilio, I think we're ready for any tricks Lucius might have. Any tiebreakers, you mean, Gilio answered. We may be in for a long night, said Mora. The ballots were collected, and Lucius kept his demons tightly around each offering plate and his eyes on every heavenly warrior. Mayer and Coleman counted again as the tension in the air tightened. The demons watched. The angels watched. The people watched. Mayer and Coleman kept a close eye on each other, silently mouthing as they counted. Mayer finished counting, waited for Coleman to finish. Coleman finished, looked at Mayer and asked him if he wanted to count again. They counted again. Then Mayer took his pen, wrote the results on a slip of paper, and carried it up to Brummel. Mayer and Coleman took their seats as Brummel unfolded the paper. visibly shaken. Brummel took a few minutes to put on his relaxed, businesslike public image. Well, he began, trying to control the tone of his voice. All right then. The pastor has been retained. One side of the room loosened up, tittered, and smiled. The other side gathered up coats and belongings to leave. Alf, what was the vote? Someone wanted to know. It doesn't say. 28-26, Gordon Mayer said accusingly, looking back toward Lou Stanley. But Lou Stanley had left. All right, get ready to move on into chapter 11. Tau, Cigna, and the other sentries could see the explosion from where they stood. With cries and wails of rage, demons scattered everywhere, erupting through the roof and the sides of the church like shrapnel and fanning out in all directions over town. Their cries became a loud, echoing drone of savage fury that rang over the whole town like 1,000 melancholy factory whistles, sirens, and horns. They will wreak havoc tonight, said Tao. Mota, Chimon, and Gilio were there to report. By 2 votes, said Mota. Tao smiled and said, very well then. But Lou Stanley? Chimon exclaimed. Was that really Lou Stanley? Tao caught the implication. Yes, that was Mr. Stanley. I've been standing right here ever since I delivered Edith Duster. I see the spirit has been working, Gilio chuckled. Let's get Edith home safely and get a guard around her. Everyone to your posts. There will be angry spirits over the town tonight. That night, the police were busy. Fights broke out in the local taverns. Slogans were spray painted on the courthouse. Some cars were stolen and joy ridden through the lawn and the flowers in the park. Late into the night, Julene Langstrad hovered in an inescapable trance, halfway between a tormented life on earth and the licking, searing flames of hell. She lay on her bed, tumbled to the floor, clawed her way up the wall to stand on her feet, staggered about the room, and fell to the floor again. Threatening voices, monsters, flames, and blood exploded and pounded with unimaginable force in her head. She thought her skull would burst. She could feel claws tearing at her throat, creatures squirming and biting inside her, chains around her arms and legs. She could hear voices of spirits and see their eyes and fangs and smell their sulphurous breath. The masters were angry. Failed, 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 pounded in her brain and paraded before her eyes. Brummel has failed. You have failed. He will die. You will die. Did she really hold a knife in her hand? Or was this too a vision from the higher planes? She could feel a yearning, a terribly strong impulse to be free of the torment, to break loose from the bodily shell, the prison of flesh that bound her. Join us, join us, join us, said the voices. She felt the edge of the blade and the blood trickled down her finger. The telephone rang. Time froze. The bedroom registered on her retinas. The telephone rang. She was in her bedroom. There was blood on the floor. The telephone rang. The knife fell from her hands. She could hear voices, angry voices. The telephone rang. She was on her knees on the floor of her bedroom. She had cut her finger. The phone was still ringing. She called out, hello, but it still rang. I won't fail you, she said to her visitors. Leave me, I won't fail you. The telephone rang. Alf Brummel sat in his home listening to the phone ringing on the other end. Julene must not be home. He hung up, relieved, if only for the moment. She would not be happy about the vote. Another day, still another delay on the plan. He knew he could not avoid her, that she would find out, that he would be confronted and berated by the others. He flopped down on his bed and contemplated resigning, escape, suicide. Saturday morning, the sun was out, and the lawnmowers called to each other across the fences, hedges, and cul-de-sacs. Kids were playing, hoses were spraying dirty cars. Marshall sat in the kitchen at the table, filled with advertising copy and a list of new and old accounts. The Clarion still lacked a secretary. The front door opened and in came Kate. I need a hand. Yes, the inevitable unloading of the groceries. Sandy, Marshall hollered out the back door. Let's get going. Over the years, the family had developed a pretty good system of grocery separating, handling, and stashing. Marshall, said Kate, passing vegetables from a sack to him in the refrigerator, are you still working on that copy? It's Saturday. Almost finished. I hate to have stuff stack up on me. How's Joe and the gang? Kate stopped a bunch of celery in mid-transfer and said, you know what? Joe's gone. He sold the store and moved away. I didn't even hear about it. Brother, things happen fast around here. So where did he move? I don't know. Nobody would tell me. As a matter of fact, I don't think I like that new owner. What's this cleaner here? Oh, put that under the sink. It went under the sink. I asked that guy about Joe and Angelina and why they sold the store and why they moved and where they moved, and he wouldn't tell me anything, just said he didn't know. That's the owner of the store? What's his name? I don't know. He wouldn't tell me that either. Well, does he talk? Does he know English? Enough to ring up your groceries and take your money, and that's about it. Now, could we get all this stuff off the table? Marshall started gathering up all his papers before the oncoming invasions of cans and produce. Kate continued, I guess I'll get used to it, but for a while, I thought I'd gone into the wrong store. I didn't recognize anybody. They might even have all new people working there. Sandy spoke for the first time. Something weird's going on in this town, Marshall asked. Oh, yeah? Sandy didn't elaborate. Marshall tried to draw it out of her. Well, what do you think it is? Nothing. It's just a feeling I get. People around here are starting to act weird. I think we're being invaded by aliens. Marshall let it go. The groceries were all put away. Sandy went back to her studies, and Kate got ready to work in the garden. Marshall had a phone call to make. Talk about weird aliens invading the town jarred his memory and also his reporter's nose. Maybe Langstratt wasn't an alien, but she certainly was weird. He sat on the couch in the living room and took the slip of paper with Ted Harmel's phone number from his wallet. A sunny Saturday morning would be a strange time to find someone home and indoors, but Marshall figured he'd try anyway. The phone on the other end rang several times, and then a man's voice answered. Hello? Hello, Ted Harmel? Yes, who is this? This is Marshall Hogan, the new Clarion editor. Oh, uh-huh. Harmel waited for Marshall to go on. Well, anyway, you know Bernice Kruger, right? I have her working for me. Oh, is she still there? Yeah? Has she found out anything about her sister? I don't know much about that. She's never told me. Oh, so how's the paper doing? They talked for a few minutes about the Clarion, the office, circulation, whatever may have happened to the cord to the coffee maker. Harmel seemed particularly concerned to hear that Edie had left. Her marriage broke up, Marshall told him. Hey, it was a complete surprise to me. I came in too late to know what was going on. Yeah. Harmel was doing some thinking on the other end. Keep it flowing, Hogan. Yeah, well, I've got a daughter who's a freshman at the college. Is that right? Yeah, doing her prerequisites, jumping through the hoop. She likes it. Well, more power to her. Harmel was certainly being patient. You know, Sandy has a psychology professor I thought was an interesting gal. Langstratt? Bingo. Yeah, a lot of unusual ideas. I bet. Do you know anything about her? Harmel paused, sighed, and then asked, well, what is it you want to know? Where's she coming from, anyway? Sandy's bringing home some weird ideas. Harmel had trouble coming up with an answer. It's, Eastern mysticism, ancient religious craft. She's just into, meditation, higher consciousness, the oneness of the universe. I don't know if any of that makes sense to you. Not much, but she seems to spread it around a lot, doesn't she? What do you mean? She meets with people on a regular basis. Alf Brummel and who else? Pinkston. Dolores Pinkston? Right, on the Board of Regents. Dwight Brandon, Eugene Baylor. Harmel cut in abruptly. What is it you want to know? Well, I understand you were pretty close to the situation. No, that's wrong. Didn't you have sessions with her yourself? There was a long pause. Who told you that? Oh, we just found out. Another long pause. Harmel sighed through his nose. Listen, he asked, what else do you know? Not much. It just smells like there might be a story in it, you know? You know what that's like. Harmel was struggling, fuming, groping for words. Yes, I know what it's like, but you're wrong this time. You're really wrong. Another pause, another struggle. Oh, brother, I wish you hadn't called me. Hey, listen, we're both newspaper men. No, you're the newspaper man. I'm out. I'm sure you know all about me. I know your name, your number, and that you used to own the Clarion. All right, let's leave it at that. I still have respect for the vocation, and I don't want to see you ruined. Marshall tried not to let lose a big fish. Say, don't leave me in the dark. I'm not trying to leave you in the dark. There are some things I just can't talk about. Sure, I understand. No problem. No, you don't understand. Now listen to me. I don't know what you found out, but whatever it is, bury it. Do something else. Cover the Kiwanis tree planting, anything innocuous, but just keep your nose clean. What are you talking about? And quit pumping me for information. What I'm giving you is all you're going to get, and you'd better make good use of it. I'm telling you, forget Langstrot, forget anything you may have heard about her. Now, I know you're a reporter, and so I know you're going to go out and do just the opposite of what I'm telling you, but let me give you a fair warning. Don't. Hogan didn't answer. Hogan, you hear me? How can I possibly leave it alone now? You have a wife, a daughter? Think of them. Think of yourself. Otherwise, you'll be out on your ear like everybody else. What do you mean, everybody else? I don't know anything. I don't know Langstrot. I don't know you. I don't live there anymore, period. Ted, are you in trouble? Leave it alone. He hung up. Marshall slammed the receiver down and let his mind race as he sat there. Leave it alone, Harmel said. Leave it alone. In a pig's eye. Get some juice to plug in. Edith Duster, wise old matron of the church, former missionary to China, a widow of some 30 years, lived in the Willow Terrace Apartments, a small retirement complex not far from the church. She was in her 80s, subsisted meagerly on Social Security and a minister's pension from her denomination, and loved to have company, especially since it was difficult for her to get out and around these days. Hank and Mary sat at her little dinette near the large window overlooking the building's courtyard. Grandma Duster poured tea from a very old, very charming teapot into equally charming teacups. She was dressed nicely, almost formally, as always when she received guests. No, she said as she sat down that morning. The morning tea was properly set, the pastries in place. I don't believe God's purposes are ever thwarted for long. He has his own ways of working his people through difficulties. Hank agreed, but weakly. I imagine so. Mary held his hand. Grandma was firm. I know so, Henry Bush. Your being here is not a mistake. I strongly disagree with that notion. If you were not supposed to be here, the Lord would not have accomplished the things he has through your ministry. Mary volunteered some information. He feels a bit down about the vote. Grandma smiled lovingly and looked into Hank's eyes. I think the Lord is forcing a revival upon that church, but it's like the turning of the tide. Before the tide can come back in, it first has to stop all its going out. Give the church time to turn around. Expect opposition, even expect to lose a few people. But the direction will change after the lull. Just give it time. But I do know one thing. There was nothing that could keep me away from that meeting last night. I was dreadfully sick. Ooh, sick. Satan's attack, I suppose, but it was the Lord who got me out. Right about the time of the meeting, I could just feel his arms bearing me up. I got on my coat and I got down there, and just in time, too. I don't know if I'd even go that far to get groceries. It was the Lord. I know it was. I'm just sorry I only had one vote. So Who do you suppose the other vote came from? Hank asked. Mary quickly added, it could have been Lou Stanley. Grandma smiled. Oh, now don't say that. You never know what the Lord might do. But you are curious, aren't you? I'm really curious, said Hank, and now he smiled too. Well, you might find out, and maybe you never will still, but it's all in the Lord's hands, and so are you. Let me warm up your tea. That church can't possibly survive if half the congregation moves its support, and I can't imagine them supporting a pastor they don't want. Oh, but I've had dreams of angels lately. Grandma was always very matter of fact about such things. I don't usually, but I've seen angels before, and always there was a great headway to be made for the kingdom of God. I just have a feeling in my spirit that something is really stirring here. Haven't you felt that way? Hank and Mary looked at each other to see which of them would speak first. Then Hank told Grandma all about the battle of the other night and the burden he had felt lately for the town. Mary slipped in her remembrances whenever they came to her. Grandma listened with great fascination, responding at key moments with, oh dear, well, praise the Lord. And well, yes, she said finally. Yes, that makes a lot of sense to me. You know, I had an experience just the other night standing right by that window. She pointed to the front window overlooking the courtyard. I was getting the place straightened up, getting ready for bed, and I walked by that window and looked out at the rooftops and the streetlight. And all of a sudden, I got really, really dizzy. I had to sit down or I'd fall down, and I never get dizzy. The only time that ever happened before was in China. My husband and I were visiting a woman's home there. She was a medium, a spiritist, and I knew she hated us, and I think she was trying to put a curse on us. But just outside her door, I had the same dizzy sensation. I'll never forget it. What I felt the other night was just like that time in China. What did you do? Mary asked. Oh, I prayed. I just said, demon, be gone in the name of Jesus. And it went away just like that. Hank asked, so you think it was a demon? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. God is moving and Satan doesn't like it. I do think there are evil spirits out there. But don't you feel like there are more than usual? I mean, I've been a Christian all my life and I've never come up against anything that felt like this. Her face grew pensive. This kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting. We need to pray and we need to get other people praying. That's just what the angels kept telling me. Mary was intrigued. The angels in your dreams? Grandma nodded. What did they look like? Oh, people, but different from anybody else. They're big, very handsome, bright clothes, big swords at their side, very large, bright wings. One of them last night reminded me of my son. He was tall, blond. He looked Scandinavian. She looked at Hank. He was telling me to pray for you, and you were in the dream too. I could see you up behind that pulpit preaching, and he was standing there behind you with his wings stretched out over you like a big canopy. And he looked back at me and he said, pray for this man. I never knew you were praying for me, said Hank. Well, it's time somebody else was praying too. I believe the tide is turning, Hank, and now you need true believers, true visionaries who can stand with you to pray for this town. We need to pray that the Lord will gather them in. It was so natural then to join hands to praise the Lord in thanksgiving for the first real encouragement to come along in quite some time. Hank prayed a prayer of thanks and could hardly get through it as his emotions welled up inside him. Mary was grateful not only for the encouragement, but for Hank's revived spirits. Then Edith Duster, who'd fought in spiritual wars before, who'd won victories on foreign soils, tightly grasped the hands of this young ministering couple and prayed, Lord God, she said, and the warmth of the Holy Spirit flowed through them. I build now a hedge around this young couple, and I bind the spirits in Jesus' name. Satan, whatever your plans for this town, I rebuke you in Jesus' name. And I bind you and I cast you out. Clunk! Rafar's eyes darted toward the sound that had interrupted his talking, and he saw two swords fallen from their owner's hands. The two demons, formidable warriors, were nonplussed. They both stooped hurriedly to gather up their weapons, bowing, apologizing, begging for pardon. Slam! Rafar's foot fell on one of the swords. His own huge sword clamped the other down. The two warriors, startled and terrified, barked away. Please pardon, my prince, said one. Yes, please pardon, said the other. This has never happened before. Silence, you two, Rafar bellowed. The two warriors braced themselves for a terrible punishment. Their frightened yellow eyes peered out from behind black wings unfurled for protection, as if there was any protection from Baal Rafar's wrath. But Rafar did not lash out at them. Not yet. He seemed more interested in the fallen swords. He stared at them, his brow furrowed and his big yellow eyes narrowing. He walked slowly around the swords, strangely bothered in a way the warriors had never seen before. A low gurgling growl came from deep in his throat as his nostrils belched forth yellow vapor. He slowly went down on one knee and picked up one sword in his hand. In his huge fist, it looked like a toy. He looked at the sword and he looked at the demon who had dropped it. Then off into space, his gnarled face registering a burning hatred that slowly welled up from deep within him. Tal, he whispered. Then, like a slowly swelling volcano, he rose to his feet, the anger building until suddenly, with a roar that shook the room and terrified all those present, he exploded and hurled the sword through the basement wall, through the earth, around Stewart Hall, through the air, through several other buildings on the college campus, and up into the sky, where it tumbled end over end in a long arc of several miles. His initial explosion released, he grabbed the sword's owner with the other. Go after it, he ordered, and he flung the demon like a spear along the same trajectory. He grabbed up the other sword and flung it at the other demon, who sidestepped just in time to save himself. Then that demon too went sailing after his sword. To some in the room, the word Tau meant nothing, but they could see by the faces and defleeting postures of the others that it had to mean something dreadful. Rafar began to storm about the room, growling indiscernible phrases, growling indiscernible phrases, and waving his sword at invisible enemies. The others gave him time to vent himself before daring to ask any questions. Lucius finally stepped forward and bowed low, as much as he hated to do so. We are at your service, Baal Rafar. Can you tell us, who is this Tau? Rafar spun around in fury, his wings unfurling like a clap of thunder and his eyes hot like coal. Who is this Tau? He screamed, and every demon present fell on his face. Who is this Tau? This warrior, this captain of the host, this sneaking, conniving rival of rivals. Who is this Tau? Complacency happened to be within grabbing distance. With a huge fist around Complacency's scrawny neck, Rafar plucked him up like a frail weed and held him high. You, Rafar growled with a cloud of sulfur and steam, have failed because of this Tau. Complacency can only tremble with speechless terror. Hogan has become a hound, sniffing and barking after our scent, and I have had my fill of you and your whining excuses. The huge sword flashed in a wide crimson arc, cutting a gash in space which became a bottomless abyss into which all light seemed to drain like water. Complacency's eyes swelled in stark terror, and he screamed his last scream upon earth. No, Baal, no! With a mighty thrust of his arm, Rafar cast Complacency headlong into the abyss. The small demon tumbled, fell, and kept falling, his screams becoming fainter until they vanished altogether. Rafar wiped the rift in space shut with the flat of his blade, and the room was just as it was before. Just then, the two warriors returned with their swords. He grabbed both of them by their wings and jerked them together in front of them. On your feet, all of you, he hollered at the others. They complied instantly. Now, he held the two demons aloft as an exhibit. Who is this Tao? He is a strategist who can make warriors drop their swords. With that, he hurled the two into the group, causing several to go sprawling. They picked themselves up as quickly as they could. Who is this Tao? He is a subtle warrior who knows his limitations, who never enters a battle he cannot win, who knows all too well the power of the saints of God, a lesson you all could stand to learn. Rafar held his sword in a fist that trembled with rage, waving it about to give extra force to his words. I knew all too well to expect him. Michael would never have sent anyone less to pit against me. Now Hogan is revived, and it is clear why he was even brought to Ashton to begin with. Now Henry Bush is still retained, and the Ashton Community Church has not fallen, but stands as a bastion against us. Now the warriors are dropping their swords like clumsy fools, and all because of this Tao. This is Tao's manner. His strength is not in his own sword, but in the saints of God. Somewhere, somebody is praying. Those words brought a chill over the group. Rafar kept pacing and thinking and growling. Yes, Bush and Hogan were handpicked. Tao's plan must revolve around them. If they fall, Tao's plan falls. There isn't much time. Rafar selected a slimy-looking demon and asked, have you laid a trap for Bush? Oh, yes, Baal Rafar, said the demon, and he couldn't help laughing with delight at his own cleverness. Be sure it is subtle. Remember, no frontal assault will work. Leave it to me. And what has been done to destroy Marshal Hogan? Strife stepped forward. We seek to destroy his family. He derives great amount of strength from his wife. If that support were ripped away, do it any way you can. Yes, my prince. And let us not neglect some other avenues. Hogan could be lethal, and Kruger the same, but they could be manipulated to compromise each other. Rafar appointed some demons to look into that possibility. And what about Hogan's daughter? Deception stepped forward. She's already in our hands. Yes. Woo-hoo! All right, one more chapter. Let's see, tonight we're going to read 9, 10, 11, and 12. Yep, last chapter, chapter 12. Woo! We're reading for you This Present Darkness. The leaves were green, that fresh new growth kind of green they wear in the early months of summer. From their small table on the red brick plaza below, Sandy and Sean could look up and see glowing leaves backlit by the sun and watch the birds flit about in the branches between their regular scavengings for breadcrumbs and French fries. This spot on the campus was Sandy's favorite. It was so peaceful here, almost a world away from the strife, questions, and disputes at home. Sean enjoyed watching the brown sparrows cheeping and scrambling for every breadcrumb he tossed onto the bricks. I love the way this universe all fits together, he said. The tree grew here to give us shade, and we sit here and eat to give the food to the birds that live in the tree. It all works together. Sandy was fascinated by the concept. On the surface, it seemed very simple, almost storybookish, but part of her was so thirsty for this kind of peace. What happens when the universe doesn't fit together? She asked. Sean smiled. The universe always fits together. The problem is only when people don't realize it. So, how do you explain the problems I'm having with my folks? None of your minds are tuned in right. It's just like an FM station on your radio. If the signal is fuzzy, the voices hiss and sputter. Don't blame the broadcasting station, adjust your radio. Sandy, the universe is perfect. It is unified, it's harmonious. The peace, the unity, the wholeness are really there. And all of us are part of the universe. We were made of the same stuff. So there's no reason why we shouldn't fit into the whole scheme of things. If we don't, we just took a wrong turn somewhere. We're out of touch with true reality. Boy, I guess so, Sandy muttered. That's what gets me. My folks and I are supposed to be Christians and loving each other and close to God and everything. But all we ever do is argue about who's right and who's wrong. Sean laughed and nodded his head. Yeah, I know all about that. I've been there too. Okay, so how did you solve it? I could only solve it for myself. I can't change other people's minds, only my own. It's a little hard to explain, but if you're in tune with the universe, a few little quirks in it that aren't in tune won't bother you much. That kind of thing is only an illusion of the mind anyway. Once you stop listening to the lies your mind has been telling you, you'll see very clearly that God is big enough for everybody and in everybody. Nobody can put him in a jar, and keep him all to themselves according to their own whims and ideas. I just wish I could find him for real. Sean looked at her comfortingly and touched her hand. Hey, he's no trouble to find. We're all a part of him. What do you mean? Well, it's like I said, the whole universe fits together. It's made of the same essence, the same spirit, the same energy, right? Sandy shrugged and nodded. Well, whatever our individual concept of God might be, we all know that there is something there. There's a principal energy that holds everything together. If that force is part of the universe, then it must be a part of us. Sandy wasn't grasping this. This is pretty foreign to me. I'm from the old Judeo-Christian school of thought, you know? So all you've ever learned is religion, right? She thought for a moment, then conceded. Right. Well, you see, the problem with religion, any religion, is that it's basically a limited perspective, only a partial view of the whole truth. Now you sound like Langstroth. Oh, she's right on, I think. When you think about it long enough, it makes a lot of sense. It's just like that classic old story about the blind man who encountered the elephant. Yeah, I heard her tell that story too. Well, see, each man's perspective of the elephant was limited to the part that he touched. So since they all touched different parts, they couldn't agree on what an elephant was like. They got in a fight over it, just like the religionists throughout history have done. And all they needed to realize was that the elephant was only one elephant. It wasn't the elephant's fault that they couldn't agree with each other. They weren't tuned into each other and to the whole elephant. So we're all just like blind men? Sean gave a strong affirmative nod. We're just like a bunch of bugs crawling around on the ground, never looking up. If an ant could talk, you could ask him if he knew what a tree was, and if he'd never come out of the grass and actually climbed a tree, he'd probably argue with you that the tree didn't exist. But who's wrong? Who's really blind? We're just like that. We've allowed ourselves to be fooled by our own limited perceptions. Are you into Plato at all? Sandy laughed a little and shook her head. I studied that last quarter, and I don't think I got that either. Hey, he was into the same enlightenment. He figured there had to be a higher reality, an ideal, a perfect existence of which all we see is a copy. It's kind of like what we see with our limited senses is so limited, so imperfect, so broken up into pieces. We can't perceive the way the universe really is. All perfect, running smoothly, everything fitting together. All the same essence. You could even say that reality as we know it is just an illusion, a trick of our own ego, our own mind, our selfish desires. This all sounds very far out to me. Oh, but it's great. Once you really get into it, it answers a lot of questions and solves, so many problems. Yeah, if you could ever get into it. Sean leaned forward. You don't get into it. Sandy. It's already in you. Think about that for a minute. I don't feel anything in me. And why not? Guess. She twisted an invisible radio dial with her fingers. I'm not tuned in? Sean laughed with delight. Right. Listen, the universe doesn't change, but we can. If we're not lined up with it, not tuned in, we're the ones who are blind. We're living in an illusion. Say, if your life is messed up, it's really a matter of how you look at things. Sandy scoffed. Come on now. You're not going to tell me that it's all in my head. Sean put up his hands of caution. Hey, don't knock it until you try it. He looked again at the sunshine, the green trees, the busy birds. Just listen for a moment. Listen to what? The breeze, the birds. Watch the leaves waving in the wind up there. For a moment, they were silent. Sean spoke quietly, almost in a whisper. Now be honest. Haven't you ever felt a sort of kinship with the trees and with the birds and with just about everything? Wouldn't you miss them if they weren't there? Have you ever talked to a houseplant? Sandy nodded. Sean had a point there. Now don't resist that, because what you're experiencing there is just a glimpse of the real universe. You're feeling the oneness of everything. Everything is fitted together, interwoven, interlocked. Now you felt that before, haven't you? She nodded. So that's what I'm trying to show you. The truth is already in you. You're a part of it. You're a part of God. You just never knew it. You wouldn't let yourself know it. Sandy could hear the birds clearly now, and the wind seemed almost melodic as it shifted in pitch and intensity through the branches of the trees. The sun was warm, benevolent. Suddenly, she felt so strongly that she had been in this place before. She had known these trees before, and she'd known these birds. They were trying to reach out to her, to talk to her. Then she noticed that for the first time in many months, she felt peace within. Her heart was at rest. It wasn't an all-pervading peace, and she didn't know if it would last, but she could feel it, and she knew she wanted more. I think maybe I'm tuning in a little bit, she said. Sean smiled and squeezed her hand encouragingly. Meanwhile, with very gentle, very subtle, combing motions of his talons, Deception stood behind Sandy, stroking her red hair and speaking sweet words of comfort to her mind. Tal and his groups gathered once again in the little church, and the mood was better this time. They had tasted the first promises of battle. A victory, even though a small one, had been won that night. Most of all, there were more of them. The original 23 had grown to 47 as more mighty warriors had gathered, called in by the prayers of the remnant, said Tal with a note of anticipation as he looked over a preliminary list presented to him. Skyon, a red-haired, freckled fighter from the British Isles, explained the progress of the search. They're out there, Cap, and there's plenty of them, but these are the ones we'll be bringing in for sure. Tal read the names, John and Patricia Coleman. Skyon explained, they were here last night and spoke up for the preacher. Now they're all the more for him, and they dropped to their knees easy as dropping a hat. We've got them working. Andy and June Forsyth, lost sheep, you could say, left the United Christian here in Ashton out of sheer hunger. We'll bring them to church tomorrow. They have a son, Ron, who's searching for the Lord. A bit wayward now, but reaching his fill of his ways. And plenty more, I see, said Tal with a smile. He handed the list to Gilo. Assign some of our newcomers to this list. Gather these people in. I want them praying. Gilo took the list and conferred with several new warriors. And what about relatives, friends elsewhere? Tal asked Sion. Plenty of them are redeemed and ready for prayer. Shall I send emissaries to burden them? Tal shook his head. I can't let any warriors be gone for long. Instead, have messengers carry the word to watch carers over these people's towns and cities, and let the watch carers see that these people are burdened with prayer for their loved ones here. Done. Sion set right to work assigning messengers who immediately vanished to their missions. Gilo had sent his warriors also and was excited to see the campaign in motion. I like the feel of this, Captain. It is a good beginning, Tal said. And what of Rafar? Do you suppose he knows of your presence here? The two of us know each other all too well. Then he will be expecting a fight soon, which is why we won't fight. Not yet. Not until the prayer cover is sufficient and we know why Rafar is here. He's not a prince of small towns, but of empires, and he would never be here for any task below his pride. What we've seen is far less than the enemy has planned. How's Mr. Hogan? I hear little complacency has been banished for failure, and the Baal is in a rage. Tal chuckled. Hogan has come to life like a dormant seed. Nathan, Armith! They were there immediately. You have more warriors now. Take as many as you need to surround Marshal Hogan. Greater the numbers may intimidate where swords cannot. Gilo was visibly indignant and looked longingly at his sheathed sword. Tal cautioned, Not yet, brave Gilo, not yet. Right after Marshall's call to Harmel, Bernice's phone nearly jumped off the wall. Marshall didn't ask her, he told her, Be at the office tonight at 7. We've got work to do. Now, at 7:10, the rest of the Clarion office was deserted and dark. Marshall and Bernice were in the back room digging old issues of the Clarion out of the archives. Ted Harmel had been quite fastidious. Most of the past issues were neatly kept in huge binders. So when did Harmel get run out of town? Marshall asked as he flipped through several old pages of back issue. About a year ago, Bernice answered, bringing more binders up to the big work table. The paper operated on a skeleton crew for several months before you bought it. Edie, Tom, myself, and some college journalism majors kept it going. Some of the issues were okay. Some of them were a lot like college paper, like this one here. Bernice looked at the old issue from the previous August. I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't look too closely. Marshall flipped the pages backward. I want to see the issues up to the time Harmel left. Okay. Ted left in late July. Here's June, May, April. Just what are you looking for? The reason why he got run out. You know the story, of course. Brummel says he molested some girl. Yeah, Brummel says a lot of things. Well, did he or didn't he? The girl said he did. She's about 12, I guess, a daughter of one of the college regents. Which one? Bernice probed her brain, finally forcing the memory out. Jared. Adam Jared. I think he's still here. Is he on that list you got from Dar? No, but perhaps he should be. Ted knew Jared pretty well. The two of them used to go fishing together. He did know the daughter had frequent access to her, and that helped the case against him. So why wasn't he prosecuted? I don't think it ever went that far. He was arraigned before the district judge. Baker? Yes, the one on the list. The case went into the judge's chambers, and apparently they struck some kind of deal. Ted was gone just a few days after that. Marshall gave the work table an angry slap. Boy, I wish I hadn't let that guy get away. You didn't tell me I'd be putting my fist through a beehive. I didn't know that much about it. Marshall kept scanning the pages in front of him. Bernice was going through a previous month. You say this all blew up in July? Mid to late July. The paper's pretty quiet about it. Oh, sure. Ted wasn't going to print anything against himself, obviously. Besides, he didn't have to. His reputation was shot to pieces anyway. Our circulation dropped critically. Several weeks went by without any paychecks. Uh-oh, what's this? Two of them zeroed in on a letter to the editor in a Friday issue from early July. Marshall scanned, muttered as he read, I must express my indignation at the unfair treatment this Board of Regents has received from local press. The recent articles published in the Ashton Clarion amount to nothing less than blatant malfeasance of journalism, and we hope our local editor will be professional enough to check his facts from now on before printing any more groundless innuendos. Yes, Bernice brightened with recollection. This was a letter from Eugene Baylor. And then she slapped her hands to either side of her face and exclaimed, "Oh, those articles." Bernice started flipping hurriedly through her June binder. "Yes, here's one," the headline read. "Strachan calls for audit." Marshall read the lead. Despite continuing opposition from Whitmore College Board of Regents, College Dean Eldon Strachan today called for an audit of all Whitmore College accounts and investments, still voicing his concern over recent allegations of mishandling of funds. Bernice's eyes rolled up and scanned the heavens, and she said, "Oh boy, this may be more than just a beehive." Marshall read a little further. Strachan has asserted that there is more than adequate evidence to justify such an audit, even though it would be costly and premature, as the Board of Regents still maintains. Bernice explained, "You see, I never paid that much attention when all this was going on. Ted was an aggressive sort. He'd gotten on the bad side of people before, and this just sounded like another mundane political thing. I was just a reporter on the innocuous human interest stuff. What did I care about all of this?" "So," said Marshall, "the college dean got himself in hot water with the regents? Sounds like a real feud." "Ted was a good friend of Eldon Strachan. He took sides, and the regents didn't like it." Here's another one, just the week after. Marshall read, "Regent Maul Strachan, Whitmore College Regent Eugene Baylor, the college general treasurer today, accused Dean Eldon Strachan of malicious political hatcheting, asserting that Strachan is using deplorable and unethical methods to further his own dynasty within the college administration." Huh. Not exactly a harmless little tiff between friends. "Oh, I understand he got bitter, really bitter. And Ted probably stuck his nose out a little too far. He started catching the crossfire. Hence Eugene Baylor's angry letter. Along with political pressure, I'm sure Strachan and Ted had many meetings, and Ted was finding out a lot, maybe too much. But you have no details?" Bernice only threw up her hands and shook her head. "We have these articles and Ted's phone number and the list." "Yeah," Marshall mused, "the list. A lot of college regents on it. Plus the chief of police and the district judge who cooked Ted's goose. So what became of Strachan?" "Fired." Bernice flipped through some more old Clarions. A loose page fluttered out and dropped to the floor. Marshall picked it up. Something on the page caught his eye, and he perused it until Bernice found what she was looking for, an article from late June. "Yeah, here's the write-up," she said. "Strachan fired. Citing conflicts of interest and professional incompetency as their reasons, the Whitmore College Board of Regents today unanimously called for Dean Eldon Strachan's resignation." Not a very long article, Marshall commented. "Ted put it in because he had to, but it's obvious he held back any damaging details. He firmly believes Strachan's cause was just." Marshall kept flipping through the pages. What's this one here? "Whitmore could be millions in arrears," says Strachan. Marshall read that one carefully. "Wait a minute here. He's saying the college could be in big trouble, but he isn't saying how he knows." It kept coming out in bits and pieces. We just never got all of them before Strachan and Ted were silenced. "But millions, you're talking real money here. But you see all the connections." "Yeah, the regents, the judge, the police chief, Young, the comptroller, and who knows who else. All connected to Langstrot and very quiet about it. And don't forget Ted Harmel." "Yeah, he's quiet about it too. I mean, real quiet. The guy's scared out of his socks. But he wasn't a very loyal member of the group if he sided with Strachan against the regents. So they rubbed him out, so to speak, along with Strachan. Maybe. So far, we just have a theory, and it's foggy. But we do have a theory, and my being in jail fits the pattern. Too nicely just yet," Marshall thought aloud. "We need to realize what we're saying here. We're talking political corruption, abusive process, racketeering, who knows what else. Who knows what else?" What was that page that dropped? What was that page that dropped? Huh? The one you picked up? It was out of order. It's dated clear back in January. Bernice reached for the proper binder on the archive shelf. "I don't want the archives all mixed up after. Hey, what did you fold it all up for?" Marshall shrugged a little, gave her a very gentle look, and unfolded the page. There's an article about your sister, he said. She took the page from him and looked at the news story. The headline read, Kruger death ruled suicide. She put the page down quickly. I figured you wouldn't want to be reminded, he said. I've seen it before, she said abruptly. I have a copy at home. I read the article just now. I know. She pulled out another binder, opening it in the work table. Marshall, she said, you may as well know everything about it. It might come up again. The case is not resolved in my mind, and it's been a very difficult battle for me. Marshall only sighed and said, you started this. Remember that now. Bernice kept her lips tight and her body straight. She was trying to be a detached machine. She pointed to the first story dated mid-January, brutal death on campus. Marshall read silently. He wasn't prepared for the horrible details. The story isn't entirely accurate, Bernice commented in a very guarded tone of voice. They didn't find Pat in her own dorm room. She was down the hall in an unoccupied room. I guess some of the girls used that room to study by themselves if it got too noisy on the floor. No one knew where she was until someone spotted the blood running out under the door. Her voice cracked, and she shut her mouth tightly. Patricia Elizabeth Kruger, age 19, had been found in a dorm room, naked and very dead, her throat slashed. There was no sign of a struggle. The entire college was in a state of shock. There were no witnesses. Bernice flipped to another page, another headline. No clues to Kruger death. Marshall read it quickly, feeling more and more like he was invading a very sensitive area where he had no business to be. The article stated that no witnesses had come forth. No one had heard or seen anything. There was no clue to who the assailant might be. And you read the last one, Bernice said. They finally ruled it was a suicide. They decided that my sister had stripped herself and cut her own throat. Marshall was incredulous. And that was that? That was that. Marshall closed the binder quietly. He had never seen Bernice look so vulnerable. The feisty little reporter who could hold her own in a jail cell full of hookers had one part of her still laid bare and wounded beyond healing. He put his hands gently on her shoulders. I'm sorry, he said. It's why I came here, you know. She wiped her eyes with her fingers, reached for a nearby tissue to wipe her nose. I just couldn't leave it at that. I knew Pat. I knew her better than anyone. She just wasn't the type to do such a thing. She was happy, well-adjusted. She liked college. She sounded just fine in her letters. Why don't we just pack it up for the night? Bernice didn't acknowledge his suggestion. I checked the dorm layout, the room where she died, the roster for the names of every girl living in that building. I talked to all of them. I checked the police reports, the coroner's report. I went through all of Pat's personal effects. I tried to track down Pat's roommate, but she'd left. I still can't remember her name. I only met her once when I was here for a visit. I finally decided just to stick around, get a job, wait and see. I had some newspaper background. The job here was easy enough to land. Marshall put his arm around her shoulders. Well, listen, I'll help you out any way I can. You don't have to carry this whole thing by yourself. She relaxed a little bit, leaning into him just enough to acknowledge his embracing arm. I don't want to bother you. You're not bothering me. Listen, as soon as you're ready, we can go over it, recheck everything. There might still be some leads somewhere. Bernice shook her two fists and whimpered. I could just be more objective about it. Marshall gave her a gentle, comforting chuckle and a friendly squeeze. Well, maybe I can handle that end of it. You're doing a good job, Bernie. Just hang in there. She was a nice kid, Marshall thought. And as far as he could remember, this was the first time he'd ever touched her. All right, we're going to close there since we're almost at 2 hours. I'm Pastor Trina Turner, and tonight has been our third session on This Present Darkness. And I want to tell you all, I absolutely appreciate your sitting in there reading, listening as I read. And I invite you back next Monday. Next Monday, we're going to do our next 4 chapters, chapters 13 through 17, right here, 5 p.m. on Facebook Live. Thank you. God, we love you and we thank you for all of those that are listening to the session on tonight. I'm asking, God, that you bless their lives, keep them, God, fill them with peace, God. God, we pray for salvation for every listener, God. We thank you for just us being able to share this time on tonight, Lord. We are united in spirit and in love, and we are here for each other. We thank you for Victory and Praise Church family, for our Bishop, Bishop Rufus Turner, and for every listener that's dialed in wherever you are in this united world. And we give your name glory, God. And I want to say thank you to each and every one of you. You have a good evening. Good night.